welcome to Butterflies of Wisdom, everyone. And please, 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 I emphasize please, on this one, all the teachers out there are going to kill me because of the subject matter we're going to talk about with my guest today. My guest today is Alexandra, and she has a podcast called Life with Herpes. So please, 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 please do not listen to this with your kids. Do not, because you guys would kill me if those kids started asking questions. But we are going to do a deep dive of how and why and how and why and all that good stuff. And I'll be throwing baseline questions in along the way. And then when I ask her at the end where people can find her, she'll give me that. And then she's going to ask me a couple questions, which she said I have a couple of questions for you. But that won't lead to the end of the interview. And I hope you guys enjoy this episode. So without further ado, I'm going to let Miss Alexandra take it away.
Well, hi. I am excited to talk about herpes. So, I'm glad we gave that little announcement. If you do have little ears around you or you're in the car listening, it's probably not the right episode for them, maybe when they're older. Or maybe you want to refer to this when they're teenagers.
Yes, that's exactly.
Exactly. So I have a podcast and a business called Life with Herpes. And whenever I say Life with Herpes, people go, wait, what? Did you say herpes? Yes, I said herpes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yes, I have herpes. I have two forms of herpes. I have HSV1 and HSV2. And to just give a quick little background on what they are, it's herpes simplex virus, so HSV. And one is typically associated with oral herpes, which would be around the mouth, which is what we could typically refer to commonly as a cold sore or a fever blister. Typically when it's around the mouth, we don't want to use the word herpes. We tend to soften that. And then when we're talking about HSV2, that is genital herpes. Really, there's no difference between either virus. In fact, until about 30 years ago, we didn't even know that there were two strains. So they were always associated with the same, just herpes. They both can be interchangeable. So technically, if you have, let's say you have genital herpes, that could be HSV1 or it could be HSV2. So that's something to think about. Really, does it matter which one's which? Not really. They do the exact same thing. they cause blisters. But that's kind of the difference with the two viruses. HSV1 is far more common than HSV2. So just to give you an idea, 2 out of 3 people have HSV1, which that's a lot of people. I mean, that's pretty much the population. To have 2 out of 3 that have HSV1, and then 1 out of 6 have HSV2. So that's also a pretty big number. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you get a cold sore, that is considered herpes, then?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I did not know that. So I worked with preschoolers for 11 years, and the parents would sometimes come into school and say, my kid has a cold sore. And we would say, get out of here. Thank you very much. Now I know why.
Right.
Now I know why.
Right.
I can figure out for many years why other teachers would say get them out of there. And the parents would say, no, they're perfectly fine. And I'm like, no, I don't want these kids around me. These kids make me sick enough. And a cold sore on top of it doesn't help. So basically a cold sore is herpes.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so
yeah.
I was going to say, how did you get herpes? But we'll get to that question in a minute.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and the thing is that the herpes virus, it's pretty contagious. It's skin to skin, and it can also be saliva, and it can also be, when semen or, vaginal, I guess, liquid. I don't know what to call it. But skin to skin. So, for example, if you kiss somebody that has a cold sore or has the virus, carries the virus, you're at risk of contracting the virus. If you, quickly share, oh, here, try my Coca-Cola or whatever, and you take a quick sip and there's saliva on there and they had a cold sore, then boom, you got it as well. So it's
so
pretty contagious. Yeah. Right.
So, okay, now we're going to get to the nitty-gritty. How did you get herpes? Then I'll swing back to my other question.
Sure.
By the way, this
is
fascinating for me.
I know.
By the way,
it really is.
Education is fascinating for me.
It is. Well, HSV1, so that's the oral herpes, I got, I was coming home from a date. I was 20 years old, and my date kissed me at the door. And he had a cold sore, and I don't know what he was thinking and why you would kiss somebody with a cold sore. And he kissed me, and it was one of those things, too. I really didn't want the kiss. I was like, oh, bye, thanks for the date. Like, I'm going back inside, and he kissed me goodnight. And 2 days later, I went to the emergency room because I was so sick. So that's something, a lot of people don't know is you can get very, very ill with your first outbreak. Like I said, I had to go to the ER. I had such a high fever, dehydrated and so much pain, the whole thing that I actually had to go to the ER to get hydrated and all that. So that was, again, just a kiss at the end of a date. And I luckily have never had another oral outbreak ever since I've been 20. So I'm what's considered asymptomatic for the HSV1 virus. I don't show any signs, but I'm at this point a carrier of the virus. HSV2, the genital herpes, was through sex. I was dating somebody who I knew, and this is what gets difficult or tricky. Is I had this preconceived notion of people that had herpes. They were dirty. They slept around. And when I use the word dirty, they didn't use protection, or they didn't have good hygiene, or, they just looked slimy, type of, like a slimy person. And I even taught sex ed in high school. I taught for Planned Parenthood. So I knew what herpes was. I knew how it was transmitted. I knew everything about it. But again, I never thought it would happen to me because I just didn't, nobody ever thinks it's going to happen to you, right? Whatever it is. You never, you're not going to walk across the street and get hit by a bus. You're not going to get cancer, whatever it is, right? We never think it's that. So I just never thought it was going to be me. And so anyways, I was dating a guy that I knew. I knew very, very well for a very, very long time. And it was probably like, we courted for a while, and it was probably even a year before we had sex. So it was this, the whole stigma thing of, oh, I waited, or it was just my boyfriend, doesn't even play a role in it. Because the virus really doesn't care how well you know the person, or how tall, dark, and handsome they are, or how good they look on paper. So he had HSV too. He had the herpes virus, and he gave it to me about a month after being sexually active with him. So it was about a month in, and I can remember being in so much pain. All of a sudden, it was right before 4th of July, so just to give you the time of the seasons, and so in San Diego, California, where I live, you know, I'd wear shorts or like jean shorts or jeans, and I can remember sitting down in a pair of jeans and just being in so much pain and wondering what was going on. I mean, my entire pelvic area was so inflamed. And I luckily had my,
That's
out.
painful.
Really painful. I remember sitting down in a pair of jeans and like I couldn't sit down, or like I'd have to, you know, adjust how I sat down so that the seam didn't hit in the right way. And luckily I had my physical that week. I started feeling bad Sunday night, but I had the physical on Tuesday, so I didn't think anything of it to call on Monday to go in. So you're going in on Tuesday. And, you know, the doctor looked and said, well, it doesn't look like herpes, but it hadn't quite kicked in yet. Like it was just the beginning of it. It hadn't quite kicked in. And, she called me on the Friday and said, you have herpes. And it was shocking, devastating. I never will forget where I was, what I was wearing, you know. I will never forget getting that phone call and hanging up and being like, time stood still. And being so mad at him. So mad at him.
I bet.
For not telling me.
I bet.
Or putting, just so mad. And when I told him.
Wearing a condom. My goodness.
You know, just everything. Just you're mad. And you go through all the things. Well, what if I did this differently? Or what if I did that differently? Or what? All those things. And what I told him that day, and this is something I really am big about on my podcast, and I tell people, is you have to tell the person as soon as possible. And it shouldn't be a text message. It should be really in person, especially if it's somebody you're dating. But you need to tell people ASAP that you have this, because that's the reason why I have it. It's because nobody, you know, I wasn't told.
Yeah.
Right? And so I went over to his house and told him. And as soon as I told him in person, he called me a slut. And he said, "Get out of my house.
Yeah.
I can't be around you. Get out of my
boy.
house. Like you're dirty." You know, and again, you're already feeling pretty bad about yourself, let alone the person that gave it to you is now blaming you for it. And I also can remember, at the time, I had my period. I had my first outbreak. I had also a yeast infection and probably a bacterial vaginitis infection, which is just as bad. So I had like everything you could possibly have going on in that area going on that you could ever have at one time. And so I remember when I picked up my prescription, it was, you know, the antiviral. I got one for a yeast infection. I got one for BV, and I picked up a box of tampons and a bottle of wine. Like, that was all I could handle.
I bet you did. I bet you did.
And
I would pick up a bottle from whiskey if it were me and say, F-U-C-K to the world. Here we go.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Now, herpes, because as I said, I worked with preschool for 11 years, and on these occasions, we would get to go store with the kids, and the teachers would get them out of there. Now I understand why completely.
Right.
But does herpes lay dormant?
Yes. So that's a great question.
Okay.
So here's what happens. Is the virus, when it enters your body, it gets really excited and it has an outbreak. And if it's HSV1, it likes to live in the nervous system around your cheekbones and around your head in that area. If it's HSV2, it likes to live in your nervous system along your spine. That doesn't really affect us in any way. That's just kind of how it lives. So when you're not having an outbreak, it goes dormant in your nervous system, and it can be dormant for the rest of your life. It can be dormant for a day. It can be dormant for a month. Typically, people with HSV1, they have less outbreaks than people with HSV2. Why that is, I don't know. Meaning someone with HSV2, they probably have between 4 and 6 outbreaks a year. And someone with HSV1, it's like 2 to 3 outbreaks a year. Again, why is that? I don't know. That's just on average, and everyone's completely different. The other thing with the virus is the longer you have it, the more your body knows how to fight it. So it's just like anything, right? It's something new. Your body is a new host for it. And it goes, what are you? And then it figures it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's a great question. So
okay.
That's really huge, the dormant thing. So that's one of the biggest misconception is once it's dormant, you don't have to worry about it, meaning it went away or you don't have it anymore.
No, you don't.
Exactly. That's the biggest misconception.
Once it's dormant, you still have to worry about it.
Exactly.
So,
once you have a virus, you always have it. But you can always transmit it even if you don't have an outbreak.
So I hate to throw cerebral palsy underneath the bus, but I will in this example. I know 2 people that, one, they have saliva coming out of their mouth like there's no tomorrow, and one happens to be my BFF, and another one happens to be another friend of mine. And I'm noticing that both of them get herpes, thank you very much, out of 10. So I'm like, well, how do I now break the news to them that when they get a cold sore, wind runs the other direction? Do people not know what a cold sore is?
I think so. So here's what happened is herpes was never a big deal, right? It's been around since the planet was created, since the Genesis. And so humans have carried it forever. And again, the herpes virus was really never a big deal until the last really in the 80s, and then there was the pharmaceutical companies that wanted to sell their drug. The oral herpes doesn't have the stigma of the genital herpes, and so we never wanted to associate the oral herpes with herpes. It was like, oh, you can't. People who have herpes have genital herpes, and they're sluts, and they're promiscuous, and they're not people that have cold sores. That's not that at all. That's not. So it's socially acceptable to have a cold sore because we've made it socially acceptable. But yeah, I mean, even someone in my family, because I was telling them about my podcast, and I said, well, our grandmother had cold sores. She had herpes. Oh, no. That's a fever blister, Alexandra. And I was like, no, that's the exact same thing with herpes. She had herpes. So it was really interesting to hear just people, in my own family that didn't even associate a cold sore or a fever blister with herpes.
Really, it's interesting. And you are doing a wonderful job at breaking the stigma. And I want to know what your favorite podcast episode you have done on a very sensitive subject, mind you. What is your favorite podcast episode that you have done on this subject?
I have to say it's my first one, and that was the most challenging for me. It was telling my story, and obviously now you can tell when you're listening and you're interviewing me, and I've gotten comfortable with my own story. But at the time I recorded my first episode, I had never told my story. So I knew my own story, and I would tell bits and pieces of it, to different friends or whatever, but I had never told the story from start to finish. And that was scary. And it was scary too because, as a fellow podcaster, you're going to say something, you're going to put it out in the world, and it's 100% you, and it's raw, and it's cut open, and and there's salt in your wound and all of that, and how is it going to be accepted? And you kind of go back to that, in my point of view, a little girl, when like you did something wrong and you did something wrong, but you didn't mean to, accidentally, like maybe you broke the vase or something, like it slipped out of your hands and you're scared. And it was kind of like that. I just went back to that. And I was scared about what, how will people listen to this in the right way? I never once wanted it to be a rant of like, oh, I hate this guy and he gave me herpes. No, I don't. That's not at all what it's about. It's about the fact, I have it. Does it suck from time to time? Yeah. Does it get in the way from time to time? Yeah, but doesn't my period too? Yeah. Like, doesn't your period always show up on vacation? Yep. So is my life any different because of it? No, not at all. And so to answer your question, I just wanted to make sure that my message was being conveyed in a way that let people know, was I angry? Yeah, I was angry. But am I okay? 100%. And should you be angry? Yep, absolutely. But will you be okay? 100%. Will your life change? Not really. Unless you let it take over your life, just like anything, unless you choose to become a victim of your own surroundings. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's a microscopic virus. So don't let this little thing control your life.
And are you still friends with the person who gave it to you?
That's a good question. I would not say we're not friends. I wouldn't say that we're in each other's life. But are we cordial? 100%.
Yeah. Are you cordial?
Are we cordial?
Are you
yes.
in 100? Are you in a life relationship? No, I don't think so.
No.
But
right.
that's okay. That's okay.
Right.
As long
Absolutely.
as it's cordial, that's perfectly fine. Now, I'm going to ask you one of my baseline questions because, we need to lighten this education lesson. If you had to be educated by anyone inside or outside your field, who would it be and why?
I was reading in the questions and the first person that came to my mind was Jackie Kennedy Onassis. And I don't know why she came to my mind because she's not an educator, but, as far as like you could say Aristotle or, but she was she was a first lady, as we obviously know, and just her story of being so young and, being brought into the power that she was brought into, and she was a widow at 31 years old. And so her life stories, I think, would be the best education. Having a husband who had, many affairs, with Marilyn Monroe and again, being the first lady and living in a Camelot type of life, and then, moving on and Aristotle and all the and marrying Aristotle and then all the tragedies that have followed the Kennedys, I just think that it would be she'd just be a very interesting woman to learn what life was, a life lesson.
Well, that's interesting that you say that. I'm surprised that her husband didn't get herpes from the hours he spent with other women, but her. Jesus, I'm surprised herpes wasn't brought on to the scene then.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing is nobody talks about it. Yeah, and nobody talks about having herpes, but now people tell me they have herpes, you know, because they're like, oh, I have it too. And you'd be so surprised. I mean, again, it's not this stigma. I mean, I guess we put a stigma on it of who has it, but you would never think Jackie Onassis, and I have no clue, right? I'm not saying she does or doesn't. That's not what I'm saying. But you would never think that she would because how elegant she is and how would she be in that situation. But when you look at her husband being promiscuous or having multiple relationships, I'm sure he came in contact with it at some point or another, you know, whether or not he picked it up or not, I don't know. And again, I'm not saying they had it by any means, but it's just really interesting when you know the numbers and the statistics of how many people carry it. You know, 75 to 80% of the population have the virus. That's you come in contact with it every day.
Yeah.
You know, every day. Whether it's the person making your coffee at Starbucks, we all have it.
And no, medications can't help herpes. Thank you very much. Parents try to put medications on the kids' cold sores. I know they don't understand in person, but a cold sore is herpes. Let's just repeat. A cold sore is herpes. And medication can't help it. It can only make it go dormant quicker. Thank you very much.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and dormant, you know, you still can transmit it when it's dormant because there's this thing called viral shedding, which means the virus just kind of it's like how our skin naturally sheds, right? We flake and you know, if you scratch your skin, you can see the little like skin particles, you know, and same thing, the virus just goes, oh, I want to shed. I'm not going to have an outbreak, but I just want to kind of shed my skin. And at that point, that person is contagious. And the thing is when we do, I'll speak for myself, when I have a viral shedding, because I don't know that I do. I have no symptoms. I have no feeling of it. There's no awareness that I have viral shedding. So that's another
Well,
big
isn't
one.
that interesting? Isn't
Yeah,
that interesting?
70%. Yeah, 70% of transmission happens without an outbreak.
I
know.
Yeah.
I know.
Okay, that's a little scary. Without an outbreak. And what I have seen in herpes is it's red and ugly. It's red and ugly. Cold sores are red and ugly, and wind will now run in the direction if she sees cold. So I'm sorry, but I have to now because wind got educated. Wind got educated by Miss Alexandra here. And so where can people, and Alexandra's laughing at me because she knows the truth. And so where can people find you, and where can people get a hold of you, and are you willing to help people come out with their stories with herpes?
Absolutely.
And yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I created this podcast. You know, I've been a podcaster for 2 years and on a completely different subject. And I just realized I have to tell my story because there's so many people with herpes and people aren't telling their stories and they're not letting it out and they're not moving on and they're holding that resentment and that anger and that, or you are like feeling like you have to be with somebody because they gave you herpes or you gave them herpes and all that. I mean, I just don't want people to live with that stigma and that fear of either being alone or fear of they're going to be judged for it. So I'm telling my story. But yeah, you can reach me. So my podcast and my business is Life with Herpes. So lifewithherpes.com or go to iTunes, Life with Herpes. And I have, you know, a ton of information on there just about it. Things I wish I would have known, before I had herpes. things I wish I would have known when I was diagnosed, things that, I've obviously shared with you all right now. I mean, 70% of the transmissions happen without an outbreak. I didn't know that, things like that, just things I wish I would have known, even though I taught sex ed, so I knew already a lot about it. So yeah, lifewithherpes.com.
lifewithherpes.com, and it's a fabulous podcast, and you guys can find it in iTunes, find it all over the place. I'm listening to it in Overcast myself, but that's just me. And so Life with Herpes, and how I found out about you is through Dave Jackson, who does the School of Podcasting, and the School of Podcasting comes out every Monday. And Dave was so fascinated by you that I'm like, okay, the teacher and he goes, okay, now we need to have a sexual lesson on this. Because Dave, the teacher and him, was so fascinated by your story. So I'm like, okay, two teachers need to be sharing her story, because I know Dave taught people how to use computers for so many years, and now he's still doing it over at Lipson.com. But any teacher should learn about a cold sore, should learn about herpes, should learn anything that they can beyond the birds and the bees in sex class.
Right.
That's just my opinion. Thank you very much. Will them? No, it's going further than that. Thank you very much. So before I let Alexandra go, I am going to have her turn the mic on me and ask me questions.
So my favorite question to ask people when I'm interviewing them, and the reason why I love to ask this question to people is because it allows myself and allows the people that are listening to understand a different side of you. So my question to you is, what does cerebral palsy smell like to you?
Okay. What does cerebral palsy smell like? And she said smell, by the way. Well, it doesn't smell like rodents. Let's just put it that way. It smells like, I tell you what it smells like when I sweat a lot, because I do. It just gives off that odor of sweat. It literally smells like sweat, because I'm one of those people, when I'm a medical to doctors, I have pulse circulation, so that means I get cold easily. I also sweat profusely, like there's no tomorrow, and that doesn't help. Like, to give you an example, when I wake up in the morning after a night's sleep, I am a ball of sweat in my PJs. So that is, it smells like sweat, basically. And for those of you who know what sweat smells like, that's what cerebral palsy smells like. Hint, hint. So, So when, and I don't know, I think I'm getting menopause early, because I am having hot flashes in my 30s like there's no tomorrow. So, trust me, I have the genes to have menopause early too. So, trust me, sweat and cerebral palsy do not mix.
I love that question, because I would have never known, right? I would have never put sweat with it. Right. Right. Yeah, that's why I'm always fascinated by asking that question, or how you feel about something. Well, what does it smell like to me? And if it smells, like breath of fresh air, or it's just a different way to kind of process opposed to use your logical mind.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was a really interesting question you asked me, and now this is public knowledge, but we did a deep dive today, so I figured I might as well do a deep dive with you because you did a deep dive with me on a subject that I never, ever, ever, ever thought I would be interviewing someone on. I never, ever thought I would figure out what a cold sore was. They just looked angry and red, and I'm like, I need to get out of there. And I was following the other teacher's leads, but I never realized until today why the other teachers were so freaked out when kids walked in with cold sores. But now I know. And yeah. And so, of course, I'll be freaked out when kids walk in with cold sores because it's herpes. It's not a cold sore. And no matter the amount of medication you put on herpes, it just goes dormant.
Right, exactly. And I mean, and here's the thing. I don't want to scare people and think that, you know, you can't touch anybody or touch anything, or, you know, if you're with somebody that has herpes, you're automatically going to catch it. Any of that? I mean, no. I don't want people to be scared. You know, if you do happen to touch herpes, like actually touch a blister, or in your case, when you have a little kid, and if you touch the kid's hand after the kid just touched his or her mouth, you know, little things like that, just go wash your hands and wash them for 20
really
seconds.
Well.
Like soap, really, really well. And that's as good as you can do. You know, the virus doesn't like any other, it likes wet, moist areas of the skin. So, you know, if you give it, you know, a portal, like if you happen to have a cut on your hand and you touch herpes to it, then it gives it a portal to have it. But in general, your skin's going to protect you and other body parts. Yeah. You know, if it's your arm that touches it, chances are you're going to be okay. Just go wash the area with soap and water immediately. Yeah.
Yep. So that's why teachers are saying go wash your hands a million times. And we sound like a person listen. And go wash your hands a million times. That's why. Because they don't want to deal with herpes and cold sores and, cold sores. They don't want to deal with cold sores. They have 15 kids to take care of, or 20 kids to take care of. And that was my life for 11 years. My life is still getting a little bit easier with third graders who know not to touch their faces and not to touch their noses and not to do anything.
Right.
That's
right.
Like
and don't touch each other.
Yeah. And don't touch each other. Well, I hope you guys, and I'm sorry I had to put don't listen with your kids in this episode, but you can listen to this episode in the sex ed class, because I think what Alexandra's doing is really, 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 really important. And what I'm also doing, breaking the stigma about cerebral palsy, is really important, because not enough people are talking about both diseases. Both diseases. I mean, the numbers of the cerebral palsy are like 10,000, and the numbers of herpes are 70%, which gets transmitted, and no one's coming out. So I'm sorry if you want to turn off my podcast and not desubscribe to it, but look, Alexandra and I are all banging to a different drum. I'm sorry, if you don't want to follow a marching band, then go get out of line with the marching band.
Right.
And so I appreciate your time today, Alexandra, and then I definitely appreciate you guys tuning in. And by the time you hear this episode, it will drop Wednesday morning. And so, yes, on the drive to work, you'll probably get freaked out, but that's okay. But that's okay because Alexandra's doing what she's doing and has a voice beyond herpes. And I have a voice beyond cerebral palsy if you guys haven't figured that one out. And so I will catch you guys next week. And this podcast has been sponsored by Grace by Grit. Grace by Grit is a clothing line out of California, San Diego to be exact. And they're giving you 20% off when you enter the code Extra Butterfly. And so take a look at their stuff. Their stuff is actually moisture resistant because herpes likes to live in moisture resistant moisture places.
Exactly.
So I would say if you're going to go the herpes, well, you might as well get a top that moisture resists the top because herpes won't live in these tops and herpes won't go against moisture resistant places either. So I just appreciate the time and appreciate the education, and I thank Alexandra for her time today. And if you guys want more information on Alex, I will have Alex's information in the show notes, and I just appreciate the time and appreciate you guys supporting me, and let's just make this world a stronger place. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks for having me on here, Wynn. I feel equally as positive about your mission as well. So thank you for sharing.
You are so welcome. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks. Hello?